Hello, everyone. Just a quick heads up here before we get started. This podcast went pretty long, so we split it up into two sections. The first part here is really focusing on some general PCFX updates in regards to the games that Filler's been playing, our previous guests on the show, as well as our new guest, Speedy Noelle, what she's been playing as well. So that's the first part, and then the second part I'll put out later, and that will basically be talking about generally kind of the historical relevance of PCFX, and also the what it would take to get the PCFX into a larger fan base today in kind of that retro game scene. Anyway, so this one's going to end a little abruptly, and then also the next one's going to start a little abruptly, so I appreciate you sticking around for both parts, though. Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Report Podcast. This is a multi-tap episode where we basically bring on other people onto the show to talk about a particular topic. We're actually doing multiple people again. It's been a very long time since we had more than one person on. I think it's the Lost Kingdoms 2 podcast specifically. So I think that might have been the first multi-tap, actually. But yeah, so I have two guests on today, and we're going to be talking about the PCFX. No real specific topics here that we're going to really be focusing on. It's going to be a more general show. And if you are listening to the audio version, there'll probably be some light video added to the YouTube version if you want to check that out. But it'll probably just be whatever I have available. I probably won't be going out of my way to like fill in every second with footage for that. Anyways, so we have our two guests on today. So we'll start with a familiar face here. Filler is back here, ready to go again. How are you doing today, Filler?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. And Filler, you were on the podcast with me about the, it was just kind of like an introductory piece to the PCFX in some ways. It's kind of also positioned as like a, let's reconfigure the narrative around this console to some degree.
Yeah, we really did kind of an overview of like, you know, the launch games and the libraries that we've played and things like that.
And you have like a significant history of the system for, I think, three reasons, just to kind of hit off the big points for anybody jumping in fresh to this. One, you worked on the Welcome to Pia Carrot translation with David, I think his name is the guy who worked with you on that.
Yes.
Two, you do fan translations today still as a whole. And you also did a very significant number of PCFX videos like over the years. Like, I think some of those videos are probably over a decade old now, right, at this point?
Yeah, it might not be that long, but, you know, I definitely was focusing on it for a short period of time. But yeah, you know, I've had quite a long history with the console, too. I did play it back in the 90s when it was contemporary.
Which I think is like a really interesting point, yeah. Because like you are one of the few people who were like there actively playing it when it was still releasing games, which I think is like a really interesting aspect to your perspective on these things.
Sure.
So, cool. And then we also have a new guest, a new fresh face here today. We have Noelle. How are you doing, Noelle?
I am doing good.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
You are fairly new to this scene, at least in terms of like talking about it like super publicly on the internet, or maybe in like a video form. Like I think your first video was like 5 months ago, right?
Yeah, I think it was December I did my video on Pia Carrot, and as we'll talk about later, I've had an interest in the system for a long time, but it wasn't until recently that I just decided to kind of dive into it and give it a shot, and ended up being really impressed with what exists on it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the impression I get from your YouTube channel is that you're not specifically aiming to talk about the PCFX.
Yeah.
It's more of the type of games that are on that system extend out. And so I know you've been dipping your toes into the PC98 and things like that as well.
Right.
So it sounds like you're looking to do like a bigger narrative on those types of games rather than PCFX specific, right?
Yeah, kind of the goal of my channel is I want to talk a lot about visual novels and particularly Eroge, because I think in a lot of cases they've been misunderstood, and it just so happens that, you know, NEC had at least tried to make a stake in that with consoles, with the PCFX having the ability to have 18+ games like Pia Carrot, and so the PCFX ends up being very adjacent to the kind of stuff I want to talk about, which is these games have interesting narratives. They have a lot of interesting things going on. Some of them can be surprisingly progressive. And so, yeah, like I said, the PCFX just kind of lines up with that because you have ports of major PC98 games like Dokusei 2 and Pia Carrot to it, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, and like I think that's like super. Like one thing I always say to my audience whenever I mention you is like I'm like, you're making the videos I don't want to make because you add a lot of context to everything, and like it takes a ton of research, a ton of time,
Yeah.
and I'm super appreciative of that. But I like look at it like, boy, I did not want to be the one to have to do that. So
Yeah, exactly. When just like one paper, like I needed one on-screen quote, and I had to search through like 15 different research papers and try to figure out how to actually access those research papers for political references, and yeah, making those kinds of videos is an absolute headache sometimes.
Yeah. It's been very, very good to see that stuff, though. It's really interesting. And, like, Filler, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, like, why this might have been the case. So, you know, around the time I did my English guide video for the PCFX, all this being unrelated to that, obviously, there's actually quite a few other PCFX videos that started coming up with, like, Video Game Esoterica, doing coverage, which we talked about on a podcast with him before. I think it's GTTV. They did like a whole kind of primer on the PCFX that I think is like fairly balanced for the most part. Still has like the issues of, like not giving the games the highest regard kind of thing. But like I feel like there's just been a really increasing wave of PCFX content out there on YouTube with that. I mean, not it's huge, but you know.
There definitely has, like even in the Japanese space, I feel like, you know, more folks have been sitting down and kind of like, you know, after the fact here decades later, just going back and, you know, just trying these games out and trying to discover, you know, more about the system. I don't know why exactly, if it's just sort of a nostalgia thing that's cycling back at this point, but it's great to see. I feel like literally the past 2 or 3 years, some of the best things that I've seen, you know, just happening, you know, for me, it has been seeing like people discovering the PCFX, people like playing, especially Welcome to Pia Carrot, and actually posting videos about it or talking about it. A Japanese user, I forget their exact handle, but on Twitter, I believe they're like Uni something, so it's like a sea urchin. I think that their icon is sea urchin-ish. You know, they just barely played through like Tonari no Princess Ralphie, and they played, I think, you know, Megami Tengoku 2, which was really cool. So, and I think that even in, you know, on like Nico Nico and stuff like that, I don't know if there are like playthroughs, like full playthroughs of those games. So, you know, so I think that that's a phenomena that seems to be happening across the board.
Yeah, those full playthroughs, as somebody who does not really know any Japanese beyond like the 1 year I took forever ago at this point, like those playthroughs are super helpful. I used, even though the Sparkling Feather one, we'll get to Sparkling Feather later, was not complete, it was like incredibly helpful for me getting the good ending of that game, because like I could sit there and study the cutscenes, like what's happening, who's involved, who do I need to build relationships with, probably, because they cut out all the gameplay, I guess, at some point for some reason. I guess they're like, oh, this is too boring of a video game to show. but it was definitely a challenge there for that. So yeah, and I'm really happy to see that kind of increased discussion around the system overall myself as well. And I think that's you know, I think you're right on some regard, definitely with, you know, it's kind of that time, you know, PlayStation, Nintendo 64. Well, I guess at some point with where we're at with retro games right now, it's probably more like PS2, GameCube, Xbox generation. But,
Yeah.
you know, there's still some overlap there, I think, still happening to some degree.
Seeing a lot of people, I see a lot of nostalgia now for the PS2 era and stuff like that. Particularly, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos and YouTubers start to cover that era and be nostalgic for that look of games. But I feel like, you know, people have trawled through all of the Famicom and NES library. People have gone through the Super Nintendo, Super Famicom. People have gone through the N64. People have gone through a lot of the popular systems and really finally combed them. But then you have the really odd stuff like the PCFX that, you know, people haven't gone through as much, especially in Western spaces. So I think now, as retro games are getting more popular, and even as stuff like interest in anime is continuing to grow and grow, people are getting more and more interested in these niche Japanese systems and wanting to explore them. And you can even see that with home computers like the PC-98. People are really curious about the games and the artwork on them. Like there's a bot or not a bot, but a person on Twitter who posts tons of PC-98 artwork, and I guarantee most of the people following it have never played those games, but there's a really deep fascination with how they look and people wanting to play them, even though, they know next to nothing about them. It's just this whole new frontier.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of maybe leads into, you've told me so far, like, why you're interested in the PCFX and why that makes sense for your content. But I'm kind of curious, like, what would you view as like your path to this system? Like, I guess, and when I say this, I mean almost like from hey, when you first started playing video games, how did it lead to you being into the PCFX? Like, where did you start, and how did you end up on this path, whether it's PCFX specific or more just in general, like, that the space that PCFX occupies?
Oh, that's a fun story. So I remember my first kinds of games I played were on a family computer that my parents owned, and it was an old Gateway Pentium 4, and I, played a bunch of stuff on it, and I want to say around like 04 or 05, I think my dad upgraded for Far Cry, and he ended up passing that old computer down to me, and because, I was a kid, I wasn't allowed much time on the computer because family rules are like that, so I'd spend a lot of my time on the main family computer using our DSL internet to try and find websites that had games I could download, and because of that I ended up finding abandonware and ROM websites, and then I kind of hung around those for a while. I really started getting into console emulation, and particularly import games. I just thought, I was like, I can't even understand this, but this looks so cool. And then eventually one of the sites I used, someone dumped a bunch of Dojin games onto it. Toho was the big one, but there was some smaller action stuff that people would often pass around. And I got really into Toho probably when I was like 12 or 13.
Wow, so you got on this track very early.
Yeah, it spiraled absolutely out of control until I just became an absolute weeaboo. And then around that same age, I also started watching a lot of YouTube videos. I think Luke Morse 1 was one of the big channels I watched, and he did a video on the PCFX. And as a young teen, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. It's this anime game console. I don't even know what an anime is, but I love this. And then fast forward to now, and I've read a couple of visual novels. I wasn't super huge into them until recently, but I was watching GameSack. I was showing my roommate a bunch of episodes, and they had the one on the PCFX and rewatched that, and they brought up Pia Carrot on it, and I just had this moment that clicked of like, they're being really negative this game, and I had good experience with other visual novels, and this is in English. I think I'm gonna go download this and play it. So I spent an evening trying to set up Pia Carrot and Yuna. I forget which one was first. I either got interested in Yuna or Pia Carrot first, but either way, I was invested in trying to see, why they were so negative about Pia Carrot. And then I think I spent like 5 hours straight one day just playing it and completing as much as I could of the game. And I was like, okay, I gotta know more about the PCFX. I gotta know more about this game. And then, I've made the Yuna and the Pia Carrot video, and a friend gave me a PCFX, and then the Angelique video happened, and I think my life's kind of spiraled out of control.
I'm curious,
in a good way, hopefully.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Phil, like, with Pia Carrot being like an entry point and being the person who translates that, like, does that feel like mission accomplished to you in some ways? Translating something like, I got somebody into the system because of the work I did in some ways?
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I mean, honestly, like, I think I felt a certain amount of guilt for a number of years, to tell you the truth, for kind of being a part of that being the first game, so to speak, like translated for the PCFX, because, I feel like the perception around the system is really only reinforced, in a kind of a negative way by people that aren't actually doing that work and sort of delving into that game and seeing more about what it's about. But yeah, no, like, I think that's fantastic. And, I would say just deeply validated, right? Just sort of listening to your video about that game, because, same thing. I've been wanting to kind of make a video about Pia Carrot in particular, just to sort of explain like why I like it so much and why it had such a profound impact on me. And like, you just came along and like just made that video, right? Like, I've probably seen that video 10 times now, maybe. and I apologize. Like, I intended to, comment on it or something like that, and I never did. But it was just so great to see that video out there. So that's amazing. I'm really glad that we're like kind of in that timeline where I went to the trouble of like, translating that game and people can appreciate it now. It's fantastic.
We're in the timeline of you translated that game. When was that? Was that 2008, 2009? I can't remember exactly.
It was around then, yeah. Maybe probably right around then, yeah.
Yeah, you do that in 2009, and then 12 years later, a 20-year-old woman watches a video by GameSack, and they're like, I want to check this game out. This could be interesting. And then it spirals off into me getting really deep into this. I actually have there was a really cheap copy of Pia Carrot too on a Japanese website. It was like $4 or something.
Wow.
And I was just like,
oh, wow.
Okay, I want to check this out. Yeah, so I have that arriving, and I really intend to check it out at some point because, again, I loved the original. I want to see more of it. I'm excited to see where further games go in it. So thank you. You got me invested in all of this, and you got me really invested in this series.
Well, it's my sincere pleasure.
I've let both of you down. I have not played either the English translation for Pia Carrot or watched your video yet. So. I'm one of those jerks who is like, I can't watch somebody else's opinion about it if I know I'm going to play something, I gotta, wait until I consume somebody else's video. All right, I'll get to this. So what I did do for you for the algorithm is I let it run in the background all the way through, so you got the full watch time.
Thank you.
Then I just muted it, did not look at it. But I will get there once I do it. And I haven't gotten any further on this. I know I talked to you about this filler I got the PCFX GA card, my PC98 I have here.
Yeah.
I am not a very good computer person, especially old computers, so I'm kind of got stuck and I don't really know like the next steps per se. I need to go back into the PC98 group and be like, please help me. I'm a dumb baby boy, sorry. So.
I think there's like one or two people in the PC98 spaces that have the card. I almost briefly considered becoming one of them, but at the same time I didn't want to pay for one of the cards because I already own an FX, so I'm kind of just like in the back of my mind it's like, this would be cool to own, but the tower is sitting right there.
The tower's cooler, man. I like the tower more than the PC98 box. PC98 box just looks like a PC. So,
right?
but the tower is like the tower of power.
Exactly.
Kind of. I guess I'm stealing that from Sega Genesis stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But anyways, I will guarantee at some point. But the nice thing about me kind of attaching it to the PCFX GA card specifically is that I'll feel like I'm doing something that's more than just me playing the video game kind of thing. I'll be testing it to see if it works there, which there should be no reason it shouldn't work, right?
Yeah, it should work okay.
But, it would be interesting to play that. So at some point.
You're braver than I am.
If I can actually sit down and figure this thing out, which maybe next month I'll do, but you guys know me. I plan.
You have my respect for getting as far as you have.
Yeah. So I guess maybe the one last question I have for you, Noelle, is just like, what drove you to create the content around this? Like, what drove you to make a YouTube channel and start making videos about this?
So I should clarify that I've done YouTube content for a long time.
Okay.
Most of my content is on another channel. It's old. A lot of it's not great, like some of it's decent, but frankly, most of it is pretty mediocre. But since that time, I mostly covered Western stuff, and I had this feeling I wanted to branch out and try and cover, more niche anime Japanese stuff because there wasn't much exposure of what I was really into. So I stopped making content on Western games for a while. And I had the idea after seeing Yuna's translation come out, and I didn't have a whole ton of work going on at that moment. I was like, this seems like a cute, short, fun game. Maybe this could be an easy way to get back into video content. I could do a short video on this, and I could start a channel dedicated mostly to talk about all sorts of Japanese stuff. So I made the video on Yuna because it seemed like just a fun way to spend some time, and I thought maybe I could upload something, and then that got somewhat popular, and it kind of, it went from there, and as I started looking more and more into games I wanted to cover, that's actually how I got the Pia Carrot, is I saw that in the video and thought that would be interesting to cover too. But anyways, I just, I started going deeper and deeper into anime and Japanese games and visual novels particularly, and I saw there was next to no content on any of this. Like, even more popular visual novels I was finding next to no content on. When I was doing my canon video, despite being one of the most important VNs ever made, like, it shaped the industry now. No one was really talking about it in Western spaces. So as I kept diving further in, I had this realization of, this is a space that I think needs discussion. So, you know, for as difficult as it is to make content, I guess what got me into making it again was wanting to expose these games to people and show them, you know, there's a lot to them. And I missed making content. Like, you know, I do freelance music now, but the thing with freelance music is you binge like 10 to 7 p.m. days for 2 months straight, and then you have this hollow feeling in your gut for 2 months straight because you have no employment whatsoever. And it ate at me horribly. And I need something to do to fill in this space, and videos work perfect for that. So, yeah, there you go.
I'm glad you can find the time for it, for
Right.
sure. Like, you make something good out of a bad thing of not having work. But
yeah, you know, not having work's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I could live the rest of my life just doing these YouTube videos. But I also gotta do work, and doing work gets me in that headspace of I need to keep doing work, or I feel like I'm gonna die because I always want to be preoccupied.
Yeah. Filler, we never really had a conversation, I think, about like how you got into the PCFX. Like, I know your friend had it. Like, what was that what did that trajectory look like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit, but you know, yeah, my buddy ended up importing it back when we were kind of getting into anime, and we were also big game fans. And I don't know if I mentioned, there was this online shop. It was called NCS, National Console Support. And I believe that is where he imported the system from. And, you know, I don't think there was like a lot of information or research. I think it was new and it was shiny and it was like anime. But, you know, it was super cool. Like, we really enjoyed that. And I feel like I've always had a bit of a ability to appreciate, or just willingness, right, to appreciate video game systems, just sort of regardless of what anyone else thinks about them, right? Like, my first game system was an Atari 7800, and I actually, like, I asked for that instead of a Nintendo, right? So I mean, my taste may be questionable, but yeah, you know, after he got bored with that system, right? And I had started studying Japanese, things like that. I bought the system from him, you know, a few years later. And it took me a while. I think I was inspired a bit by David Shadoff, who is also kind of a PC Engine nerd.
Yeah.
I may actually mention him more a little bit later. But we ended up working on a game, like a fan translation together for a PC Engine game. But just in talking with him, he had a complete PCFX collection, right?
Oh,
and
wow.
I just thought that was the most amazing thing, right? You know, it's not a big library of games, like 62 games, so it's totally doable. But sometimes it's just not the kind of thing you think of, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, eventually I end up thinking, well, hey, maybe I could do that too. And, you know, that's just kind of led to me like having a complete collection and wanting to dive into the library more. I mean, you feel, you know, especially some responsibility, you know, to actually play the games that you've spent a bunch of money on and things like that. So yeah, it's just it's been a lot of fun for me.
Did he talk to you at all before he purchased it, or is it just like, hey, dude, check it out kind of thing?
It was exactly that. He was just, it's like it arrived one day. He's like, look at this new thing I got. I'm like, that is amazing. Yeah, that was it.
So to kind of get back on track with like some of the games you've covered so far, Noelle. So we talked about Pia Carrot. Is there kind of anything else you guys would want to say about Pia Carrot? If not, probably can just move on to what your next video is.
Watch Noelle's video.
Watch Noelle's video, yes. If you have not, it will be linked for sure. If it's in the YouTube, I will add the card at this point. Click it now. Come back.
Yep.
At some point. So, anyways, so I think after that, your next PCFX specific video though was Angelique, right?
Yes, it was on Angelique Special, which is a port. It was the first time the Super Famicom game got ported. and the Super Famicom game itself was, I think I've read in interviews, it was kind of a mild success. It was, it's widely considered the first otome or maidens game, or basically dating sim for girls. And it's really interesting because you can tell it has roots in Koei strategy, because it's made by another team internally from Koei. And if you play another game like Nobunaga's Ambition or the Free Kingdoms games, you can really see the company's own internal influence on that, and how mechanics are borrowed or repurposed, which is absolutely fascinating. And I think it's interesting that they specifically note in interviews that it's with Special the game really seemed to take off, because obviously voice actors are a big deal in Japanese media, and Angelique Special was the first time that within the Angelique game itself, because it was the first CD console they ported it to, you had these really big budget voice actors. So I don't know if the PCFX version that I covered was specifically the one that made Angelique break out into the mainstream, but it is the first version that, it laid the groundwork for what would become a very long and enduring franchise, and what would spawn an entire genre of video games, even if Angelique Special itself is kind of a mess of a game.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it came out on PlayStation later, right? I would think that's probably where it probably got traction, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see, so I think you brought this up in your video for this, is that so the PCFX has problems with streaming audio, multiple tracks of audio. Yep. And so I think you mentioned in your video, there's one scene that has this really energetic music, and then a guy just jumps in, and all of it goes quiet.
It's the intro of the video.
Yeah.
He's like, yo, kita ne. It was so funny, because the PCFX is really weird, because the game, it streams, because there's so much voice acting, the music is stored as a stream of audio, as a stream of just uncompressed audio, as far as I can tell. Or maybe it's in whatever codec the PC Engine, or PCFX might use, I'm not sure. But it's the same as the voice acting, so in order to play voice acting, the music has to stop. So you get stuff like that, where most of the time you enter in a guy's room to talk with them and try and bond with them, the music, it kind of cuts off normally and you get a normal conversation. But it was particularly with him, I think it was Oscar, that he does this insane backflip upon entry, and he has the most energetic theme in the game, and it was so funny that I just had to put it at the start of my video. I couldn't get over it. And apparently it does it on the PC version as well, from what I've read. Which I actually I'm looking at the VNDB list now. The release order was, like I said, the PCFX was the first one to have voice acting, and that's where it got really big. And then 3 months after, they put it on Windows, which I think was kind of a mild success. And then you had the voice fantasy version for Super Famicom, which is funny because it has the external, you had to hook up an IR transmitter to your Super Famicom, and it would tell your CD player with the Angelique CD what voice line to play.
All right.
Then, I
was not aware of that.
It's insane. It's absolutely surreal. And then, there's the PlayStation version, which probably is where it got successful. But again, it's really interesting that, the PCFX doesn't get much credit, but it is the system that laid the strongest groundwork for the start of what's now a really enduring subgenre of dating sims.
There are a lot of these games on the PCFX, right? There's a lot of Angelique games. There's also, I think it's Albare no Otome or something like that. And I guess, have you played any of those other ones yet at all?
So, I haven't played any of the other Otome games on the PCFX, which I probably should, because, Angelique was, I don't know if it was faithful to the PCFX in terms of it would only release games on there, or they only release first on there. You know what, I actually have a link right here. No, it actually looks like, they released these games generally first on the PCFX and then ported them to later systems, which is some really fascinating dedication to the platform. But I haven't played any of the other Angelique games. I want to at some point. I'm better at Japanese because they all look very interesting. I hear they do interesting things. I haven't played the other Otome game, Albare no Otome, which it also seems very interesting. But it's curious that you bring up that there are other Otome games on the PCFX, because I feel like there's this idea that the system was only ever marketed to otaku men, that it only ever appealed to otaku men, which is in a lot of ways true. That was a big market that NEC was pushing for. But you can look at the games library and see, NEC, it seems like they more broadly wanted to get people invested into anime rather than just specifically the stereotypical shut-in otaku who's after dating sims.
Yeah, and I would assume they have. Maybe I'm speaking too much on this, but I assume they probably had some success if they continued to release these games on the PCFX, right?
Yeah.
So there probably was an audience there.
Yeah, if they have this level of faithfulness where games were releasing anywhere from, they had anywhere from 5 months to a year worth of exclusivity, surely there had to be some women who were some women or gay men who were playing the PCFX and really enjoying these titles, which is, it's a fascinating thing to think about with this system, because that's not a perspective you often see people think about. People don't think about dating sims from the perspective of women or LGBT people often, but specifically the PCFX is commonly regarded as the otaku nerds game system.
Filler, I know you're a little more tapped into like the Japanese PCFX. I mean, I think you more or less just kind of like linger on Twitter or something like that and see that kind of thing. Have you seen any anyone that you kind of suspect would be either a woman with that stuff or somebody who was LGBT or something like that? Or because I feel like most of the people I see online definitely feel like older otaku men who are just like smoking cigarettes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I mean, there's a blog that I guess if you'd call it a blog, that's been around since the 90s, really, when the PCFX was contemporary, that just has all of these people's comments about the games, right? You'll just go and you'll click on the game, and then it'll just be everybody's opinion about it that from that time. And thinking about it, when I've looked at that, it's definitely felt like kind of a largely sort of like young male otaku audience, right? Granted, I don't know that I've actually delved into the comments on the otome games and things like that as much. But yeah, even I would say just what I've gleaned on Twitter and things like that. I haven't really seen that, sort of otome game player, who is like nostalgic for that time of the PCFX. So that's an interesting question, and I think that's also could have been a really fascinating trajectory for the system if those games had taken off maybe a little bit more and sort of buoyed the system longer. I think the system, people kind of poke fun at it as, let's say, a failure, which I think possibly from NEC's perspective or anything like that, it may have failed on some levels, but I think if it really found an audience for those games, that would have been really interesting to see that sort of blossom more on the system.
Noelle, on your side, do you think you see yourself doing more Angelique stuff in the future on the PCFX, or you feel like you kind of got your fill with the first one for that?
I absolutely see myself doing more stuff. When I'm further into my Japanese studies, when I'm better at Japanese, I would absolutely love to cover Angelique Special 2. And let me see what the other one was, because it was actually an RPG. Yeah, Angelique Tenkyu no Requiem. It looked... I
played a little bit of that, actually.
Yeah, I really want to play that.
I put an hour into it. The problem I have is that I'm not really a huge fan of the classic RPG of just attack, defend, item, whatever. Yeah. So I really need something in addition to kind of to draw me in, and definitely the relationship stuff with the otome stuff definitely is a help with that. But I think for me specifically, and I've been saying this for 10 years, and who knows what will actually happen, I think Blue Breaker has always been the game that jumps out at me a bit more. Not so much because of the gender of the characters or anything like that, just because that game sounds like it's a nightmare mess to play because of its relationship aspects of there's just a lot going on there, from what I've read and heard and talked to people about, where I feel I haven't heard that much about the Angelique game. I mean, I'm wondering if it's more straightforward of just this is an RPG, but you can end up with a different ending depending on the guy kind of thing, right?
From everything I've seen about Angelique, I don't know if I would call it straightforward. What do you think, Noelle?
Really? Okay.
Yeah, Angelique's. I mean, I talked about it a lot in my video, but I don't think I've met men in real life who are as picky or petty as any of the guys in Angelique. It is truly fascinating how petty the AI in that game is. it's funny because the game itself is like not particularly hard to play, right? You know, I started at the beginning of my Japanese journey. I didn't even finish Genki 1 and I was playing that game and I was mostly managing it. The issue is that there's so much RNG that it's actually absurd. And so I think it gets better as the series goes on, but like, dear God, that first game is just an absolute nightmare to play at some points. I imagine because they're throwing in, you know, RPG systems, they maybe have to tone it down a bit and find a way to work it in, but when the focus of the game is those systems and basically nothing else, like, wow, do they go ham with it.
Yeah. Have you played the little minigame collection thing? I assume it's a minigame. It's like a weird board game minigame kind of thing. Like, you move around a map and stuff like that. I think there's like a Game Boy Advance version that came out later on as well. I forget the name of that one.
You know what? I actually have not. The weird thing is I haven't delved super deep into this series because, like, a lot of how I read Japanese games right now is I use a text hooker, and then I copy the text from the game and put it into my browser and use a browser extension, Yomi-chan, and then I can dictionary through stuff I don't know, and that's mostly how I learn words. You can't really do that with, like, PCFX or Game Boy Advance stuff, so I'm holding off on a lot of those, and that's also why I haven't delved deep into the Angelique series outside of the PCFX games, because I really want to cover the recent stuff. I really want to cover, actually, the remake of Angelique that came out on Switch not too long ago, but it's also just above my pay grade, and I feel like I'd be missing far too much to actually enjoy the experience.
I think it looks like it's called, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, Fushiki no Kuni no Angelique. That's on the PCFX as well, for that. And yeah, at least I don't know how accurate this is, but the wiki categorizes it as a board game. So I played a little bit of it, and it was one of those things that I didn't like. When I don't commit to like playing a game I can't understand, it becomes significantly harder to make any progress. It's when I commit that it becomes like, oh, this is actually like, once I start putting the puzzle pieces together, like, it's kind of crazy how far you can get in these games without, you know, knowing any Japanese really, or knowing very little Japanese. So that's the one that I've sat down and I probably should spend more time with, because that's like, when it comes to probably the people I'm talking to through my channel, that's probably more relevant to them to some degree. But we'll see. I would love to play every PCFX game someday. So
that would be absolutely wonderful. I really want to someday as well. There's a lot of, I feel like, you know, like I talked about earlier, people have scraped the bottom of the barrel for a lot of these game libraries, like Famicom and N64. But with stuff like PCFX and, you know, even PC-98, it's a big part of why I love my PC-98 so much, is you pick up any one of those games and you're probably going to get an experience that no one in English-speaking cultures really knows much about. And it's that same joy of looking through uncharted territory that I used to get as a kid when I just play, you know, random games. And before the era of everything being on YouTube, you really had to figure all this stuff out yourself and, you know, experience the game as it is with nothing going in. I think there's a big draw to that with consoles like the PCFX.
Just an FYI, so I did check that Angelique in Wonderland game. It does say that it's like a Sugoroku or Sugoroku style game. So, that's like a board game. It's like, you know, whatever, Shoots and Ladders or something like that. Yeah. Game of Life, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just remember, like, there's, like, trains of men walking across the stage or on the board, just, like, a bunch of them walking behind each other is the big thing I remember.
There is a screenshot of a Columns-style game with, like, you know, the faces of handsome men.
Oh my god, that's incredible.
I don't know how much is in there, but I'm aware there's at least that Columns game in there for that. So it's an interesting looking one. I just haven't sat down and, like, put time into it. I think there is, like, if anyone is looking into maybe playing something like this, I think the Game Boy Advance game has, like, a game facts guide somebody made, and I think that pretty much applies to the PCFX one if you want to get into this without learning any Japanese to actually understand what's happening, kind of thing. But I have not looked at that guide to see if it's, like, accommodates it. I think Vink with Japan Retro Direct, I think he made me aware of it when I imported it, and he's like, by the way, here's this, you should have this. So to get back to the more, like, I guess otaku straight male kind of side of things, so you also did a series of videos about Yuna specifically, right? And I would say that probably more aims towards, like, that audience probably.
Yuna's weird because, like, you know, playing it as a woman, I get this feeling like, there's nothing actually, I'd say, like, otaku pandery about Yuna, in the sense that, you know, the game itself, it's not super big on ecchi in a way that's, like, massively uncomfortable. Most of it's, though what little is there is pretty goofy, and, you know, Yuna is obviously like, oh, she's a cute idol, she's the perfect girl, but she's also really genuinely funny and an actually fun and good character. So it's interesting that, yeah, that probably was the audience they were going for with Yuna. They wanted basically a virtual idol, but she's a genuinely really enjoyable character overall. But yeah, so I did the videos on the games. Yuna 1 is still a pretty fun adventure. Yuna 2 is much more refined, and again, it's a great time. Yuna FX, which I think was one of the topics we wanted to cover in this podcast, was
interesting.
yeah, interesting's a nice way to put it. That game is, I like I say in my video, there is this charm to games that are just absolute trash, or games that are just complete messes. There's nothing that really works in them, but they're super ambitious and interesting for some reason. Yuna FX falls in that category where I wouldn't tell anyone to play it if they were looking for a good video game. I think that would be really mean of me. But if someone wanted a game where there's just these genuinely fascinating ideas, these things that could work, and things that, you know, given a couple more years would be fascinating to explore, but instead are put on this system that, you know, this system and this budget that struggles to make that all realized, it's a really interesting way to kill free hours.
Yeah, to add some context to, like, what this thing is, it's like, it is a, I guess you could say, linear animated adventure game kind of thing. You get, like, dialogue options, but none of it matters. It's more of just, like, for outtakes kind of thing. Like, here's a little goofy thing that happens.
Yeah, right.
And probably a big driver for why this is the case is it doesn't have much of its own, like, assets that were created for it. It's all taken from just, like, an OVA that came out, I think, like 5 months before or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So what's fascinating, because I know you say it's trash, and I'm gonna agree with you that it's not very good. But there are things that I like in the moment. This is one of those situations where, like, in the moment of playing Yuna FX, it is not very good. But when you look back at it, when you think about what you just experienced for the 3 hours, there are some interesting things in there. One, it definitely feels like a tech demo. Like, somebody said, see what you can do with the PCFX, use this stuff just so we don't have to make anything. They made something, and then they're like, oh, okay, ship it, kind of thing, is what it feels like. But you can kind of start seeing the pieces of what would be interesting, even if it was just the OVA, right? Because I think there are mini games in there. So basically, as you go through this adventure, it follows the OVA's plot, literally uses a lot of the animated cutscenes, uses still shots from, like, individual frames from the anime or the OVA. Yeah. But they put in, like, little mini games where it's like, okay, here's a part where Yuna gets, like, thrown in the water at a boat, something like that, right? Yeah. And so you have to do that. You have to play that part, and you have to throw it. And that's very cool. That is a good minigame. It's the best minigame in that video game. There are other minigames that don't get nearly as close, but they have context in the world. I think the problem is where things stop having context anymore. Like, when it's like, here's a card game. Here's some weird matching game. And admittedly, they're like, okay, it's on a computer system that's going to unlock this door. So I guess there's, like, some context, but when that's, like, half your minigames...
Yeah, it's flimsy. And like you said, I think, you know, you play it and it's like, oh my god, this is a wreck. But you look back at it, it's really interesting, especially in the looking at a larger scope of visual novels. Because particularly Yuna FX's idea of being an animated visual novel is something that got it's been repurposed before. I don't remember all the games that did it. The one that comes to my mind is Steins Gate Elite, which actually reminds me a ton of Yuna FX, because it is quite literally just it's a reiteration of Steins Gate, but they took all of the original artwork out and instead used animation and stills from the anime and animated a couple of new scenes. And like Yuna FX, I think Steins Gate Elite is awful. I think Steins Gate Elite is especially awful because you compare it to the very creative and incredible art and art style of the original game, and it's just all sucked out and replaced with anime that really does not function in the context of a VN. But Yuna FX's ideas are fascinating in how they seem to crop up in subtle, completely unrelated ways as the industry evolves.
Yeah.
And the idea itself wasn't bad. Like, the idea of an animated visual novel I think it's a genuinely really good idea, but I don't know what happened during that game's development, but something went wrong.
And sometimes one thing I do wonder, because I do feel like, so if you're going to play this game, like the 100% thing I recommend you do is watch the OVA first, because it's the same story. And if you don't know Japanese, you'll get the story. And then when you're playing it, you have the context for what's happening. Yeah. Like the little outtakes are kind of whatever. There's not, as far as I can tell, nothing important in there.
I was able to read some of them. You're absolutely right. There's nothing important going on there. It's literally just like one or two internal thoughts from Yuna, and then it proceeds as normal.
Yeah. So like to me, this is like almost, it's not that those things should be necessarily paired. You probably shouldn't watch the OVA and play Yuna. The only reason I say that is because the OVA is in English, the game's in Japanese.
Yeah.
If somebody, and I'm not saying this is worth anybody's time, I do really think it's a waste of time. If somebody did fan translate Yuna, it would be a worse experience for sure than watching the OVA.
Yep.
But I think there would be more value to it because you are getting that story throughout it.
Yeah.
And there are some interesting things it does with the story where like you're on a ship with Yuna and you get almost like Yuna's perspective on certain things happening, but how it's implemented is pretty bad, where she's just like watching computer screens and then she like makes one comment afterwards. And then they kind of break that reality at some points, because later on there's like computer screens where she's watching herself for an event that you don't see happen in the game. And there's like later scenes where she is not involved in the scene and there's no computer screen or anything like that, yet you're still seeing it. So like it's not consistent in that view. But like I can just see the pieces like, okay, if this had more time, if this had more budget, and even if it was still just using the OVA, I could see it being a valuable substitute to that as like an interesting way to experience that OVA. Sorry, Phil. I know me and Noelle have been talking forever.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just gonna say, for what it's worth, my impression of the game in sort of English language PCFX fan circles, even kind of back in the day, was that people had a generally positive impression of Yuna FX.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's one of those games that would get recommended kind of along with the other like English friendly games for people to check out. And just listening to this conversation, I think some of that is probably that the game is quite linear and you get to see a lot of cool animation. Yeah. And I was always kind of confused by it back in the day, but I think that's because I was I became a pretty big like anime fan at the time, and so I had seen the OVA for Galaxy Fraulein Yuna, but I think that some of these people who were playing the game on the PCFX and recommending it probably hadn't. So it was their first exposure to Galaxy Fraulein Yuna. Possibly they hadn't seen the OVA at all, and it was like a kind of an accessible, playable game on the PCFX. So I guess that might be another another perspective.
Like, I think there's also a novelty to it. Like you said, a lot of these people hadn't seen the Yuna anime. I think seeing, back in the day, there must have been a real serious novelty to real animation in an anime video game. Like, it's not just drawn pictures or stills or anything. It's actual studio quality animation made for a studio quality product, which, you still don't see very often. And it's I think there is a novelty to that. Like, even as I was playing it, there was a real novelty to, wow, this is very seamlessly going between these singular shots and this animation, and it all flows well. It is genuinely fascinating. I imagine for a lot of people, it must have been mind-blowing back in the day to see that happen, even if, there's not much substance to it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And also it made me think there is a demo disc for that game, and I could be remembering incorrectly here, but I believe that it was actually a pack-in demo disc with some PCFX consoles. It's entirely possible the used console that I got, I think, may have actually had that Yuna FX demo disc in it. So, clearly there was at least on the part of the people making the game some kind of an impression that this was putting a good foot forward to have a demo available, possibly even packaged with the console. You might need to confirm that. So that's an interesting point. I think that might kind of reinforce your perspective there.
The unfortunate thing about that demo disc is that it only has the slot machine minigame in it. And
Oh my
seriously?
god.
yeah, I've played through the demo disc.
Is there any animation?
So I mean, so it does have the beginning part of the game. Let me take that back.
Okay.
So you do have to, when it comes to the mini games, the only one you play is the slot machine game.
Gotcha.
It
Okay,
ends
yeah.
right
Gotcha.
before the boat mini game. So it's not like you put the disc in, it's a slot machine.
But
was
you
gonna
do
say-
you do get that that
Yeah.
high quality animation
Yeah,
that
which
may
is
have
what-
been impressive at the time.
Yeah,
Which is what they
for
would
sure.
have really been selling.
Yeah, for sure. And like, okay, as a Games for Girls fan, let me say
Yeah.
this about the slot machine. I do love that you dress yourself up with the slot machine.
Right.
I love you get
It's
different
so good.
outfits. It's so good. The only problem is that they require you to put on a particular outfit, and
I
they
know.
don't tell you. Like, I can't read Japanese. Impression I get, they don't really tell you what that
So,
outfit is supposed to be.
They don't tell you what the outfit is, but I've glanced through the manual, and I want to say the outfits are actually, I think they're in the manual somewhere. As
got
well
that
as
impression, yeah.
if you've seen the OVA, you know what the outfits are. So I watched the OVA, I think just before I played the game again. So I kind of had some of them fresh in my memory, but then I also had to Google search another one because, I couldn't commit all those outfits to memory.
Yeah. I had to
some
go
real
back and
copy
scroll
protection.
back to the OVA and be like, okay, what was she wearing as her street clothes? I think the thing I was missing was like, I don't remember her name. The red hair girl. She has like a
Yuri.
weird like
Yeah, Yuri.
cat emblem on her shirt or something like that
Yeah.
she has. And that's the thing I kept missing. So I was like, this looks really out of place on this outfit. And like, oh, that's just the piece that she's
Yep.
wearing. So
And that threw me off too, because I was like, oh, this doesn't look right. Oh, it's right? Okay.
yeah. But I do appreciate it. It's just not good to play.
Exactly.
That thing. But yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned earlier, though, that like people enjoyed this. And so this is one of those things that where my expectation of what somebody's impressions would be, because I try to think that through of like, okay, what is this experience for somebody who didn't play it this way, right? They played it through without the OVA first. And it's interesting that that kind of was the opposite of what I expect, because I would expect that not enough. I don't know enough about Yuna 1 and 2. I do not get the impression that the events of Yuna FX are important. I get the impression that it is, OVA appropriate of we have to shove a story in like less than an hour, right? I kind of feel like, and I think I mentioned this on Twitter at one point, I feel like Yuna feels a lot like Sinner Kagura to me, where like none of the characters really are like super interested in what's happening, but they just kind of are along for this ride in some ways. Obviously, they do have their own objectives, and
Yeah.
Sinner Kagura has a huge cast, so each character is different, right? But so sometimes it can be hard to follow what's happening because Yuna seems disinterested in what's happening the whole way through.
You know what's funny is you touched upon two of my. I mean, okay, Yuna's not one of my weak points, but Senran Kagura is actually a weak point of mine. I've played. I haven't played Burst yet. I played a little bit of the remake on the PS4. I played all of 2. I played all of Shinobi Versus, and I played all of Estival Versus. I will eternally defend Senran Kagura, as a lot of the characters do have interesting things going on, particularly since Shinobi and partly through Estival Versus. But on the note of Yuna, what happens in the OVA is actually important, at least the second OVA, I believe, because some of those characters come back in the third game. I know at least Misaki apparently comes back. And I haven't played the third game. I can't confirm how much of this is true. I'm just going off of hearsay and what I've seen. But Yuna's a weird case where the OVA and the events of it actually seem to have a further impact on the series, which is not something you see often, because most of the time those 90s OVAs are kind of just like absolutely nothing.
And I should like preface that I have not played those first 2 games, so like I have no context for anything. So as somebody who has not played those games, it seems very like kind of whatever in terms of story.
Yeah.
But when you start adding context in, I think that's a big thing. I think that's also part of like what makes Senner Kagura works is like the moment to moment, like, and I should specify, I've only played Peach Peach Splash. I really like the mechanics of that game.
That's why you get that impression. That game has like nothing story-wise to do with the rest of the series. It's so bad.
It's weird. I've been told it is a mainline story game from
It
other
is.
people.
It shouldn't be, but it is.
But yeah, so like that is that, like when I talk about that game and like what I don't like about its storytelling, people will say you just won't like Senator Kagura is what they tell me. So I don't know if that's really true or not.
That's not true. Like I get made fun of for it, but I am a staunch Senran Kagura defender. You can brand that on my Twitter profile, and I'll stand by it. But Peach, whatever you want to call it, is it's a pretty mediocre game. But yeah,
I love Peach Splash from a mechanical perspective. I will say. And Kanagawa Jet Girls as well, kind of related.
I need to play that one.
Love that game. I do not like the story, but and the single play. The problem is single player content all really bad. The multiplayer is where it's at, and that community is mostly dead. Yep. Although I think there might be somebody. So let me give the shout out to Anime Esports. Go check them out. Maybe they're still playing it. I was playing with them. It's a great game to play competitively. So, anyways, Senator Kagura off the plate there, but yeah. So Yuna FX, I think it is. I don't know if it's worth playing. I'm still really on the fence about that. But if you want to play it, it's playable.
I have the take that if you're really into visual novels and Japanese adventure games, it's worth playing Yuna FX because it's this perfect hodgepodge of ideas that don't work and some ideas that would come back later. And it really gives you this idea that in general of how experimental that kind of scene was. Because, I've been playing a lot of PC98 games, and what really amazes me is the lengths people want to go, be it either thematic or in gameplay, to try and integrate ideas they really want to explore and things they think they could push technology further with. And Yuna FX, even if it was just, probably made as a tech demo, it's a really good example of that kind of mentality, which is, that let's just throw everything on the plate. Maybe some of it's going to stick and advance the genre. I love that. That is exactly what I'm into.
All right, I think that's enough Yuna talk for us for now. There's a lot of thoughts there, and it helps that I went and played through this specifically because it's only 3 hours? Okay, let me do that. So, Filler, it's your time to shine. Makeruna Makendou Z. You made me play this game for a while. I really liked it. Where are you at with that game right now?
I gotta play this game.
That's a great question. Well, so when you say I made you play it, you were inspired to play it after watching my videos?
I think you. So I was asking hey, do you want to do an English guide on any of these videos? And you were like, you gave this, and I was like, okay, let me use your footage. And you're like, no, use your footage. So I was like, okay. So I went and played it for I think 6 to 8 hours. I don't think I did not finish it. I can confirm that. I got to the part where you get to there's what are they called? Is it called onsen kind of things or whatever?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. The open air baths.
Open air baths. I got to that part. I don't think that's very far in the game. But it was an interesting game, and I could definitely go on and talk about what I think is interesting about it, though. I would like you to chat a little bit.
Yeah. No, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So, this is where I'm going to kind of expose myself as an enormous flake. But, it's interesting when we were talking about maybe doing a podcast, I'm just like, man, I don't know if much has really gone on this year. But, then I realized I'd played through a whole bunch of Makeruna Makendou Z. I was actually asked, I shouldn't say this, I volunteered to play this for someone else.
It's a chain of events.
Yes. I apologize. I forget their name. They hang out on romhacking.net though. And they actually ponied up money for this. So they were like, hey, I'll pay somebody $100 to play through Makeruna Makendou Z because there's no video footage, of an actual playthrough of the game on YouTube. And I figured, man, I'm the perfect person for that. Right. And, money, whatever, it's really not, it's not enough, right, to cover playing through this whole game. It's kind of long and tedious in some ways, but it's something I've been meaning to do forever anyway. So this is the perfect excuse. And I posted what I want to say, maybe 11 videos of it over the past year. And then I totally just lost interest and I stopped playing it. I feel so bad. And it's not that I dislike the game or anything like that. I just do not have the stamina sometimes to retain interest in things Elden Ring, for instance. I played for 60 hours and then I just don't really care to go back and play it right now, right? I've gotten my fill of that. So I fully intend to go back and play more of Makeruna Makendou Z. But it's actually it's a really entertaining game. It's an RPG. I would say kind of a traditional turn-based RPG in some ways. It's a little streamlined, and I would say the game that it most directly reminds me of, sort of in modern terms, is really the Neptunia series.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it is very character focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
These characters, they actually have a little bit of a backstory. Previous to this game, there were two other games. Kendo Rage on the Super Nintendo, I believe, was actually localized here. There was a 2D fighting game, a versus fighter on the PlayStation, and then there was this RPG on the PC FX.
It's a drama CD as well, apparently.
Yeah,
I found out through Beep posted it.
There's an OVA, which I've really wanted to get on Laserdisc. I haven't really been pursuing it recently.
I watched that OVA and completely forgot I did. I even recommend people watch it. Yeah, that's a very good OVA. Right. And like I will say, if you do want to play this game, I think it's like a very important starting point because it adds a lot of context if you don't have any of what this game is about.
Sure. So. Well, speaking of which, so I mean, basically, it's about these two sisters and their cousin. So it's Mai and Hikari Tsurugino. Their cousin is Saya. She ends up showing up pretty early in the game. But they're like these monster hunters, right? They basically come from this family that, from ancient times have sort of like been demon hunters, right? Like that's kind of a trope, I feel like, that's come up in various anime. So they have this strong connection to the spirit world. And, there's this ridiculous gimmick where like their school is whatever, like 20 miles away from where they live, and they don't have a car or anything, so they have to walk to school. So they have to get up like whatever, several hours early to walk to school as be part of their training regimen. And the name of the game, Makeruna, I think, we used to kind of pronounce it like Macarena, what I'm saying? But it means like don't lose. But, in terms of a translation in this context, I may be stretching, but I feel like it's a little bit more like never give up. Makendo. Now, kendo is actually like a martial art, right?
Yeah.
I believe it's the sword martial art. It's taught in Japanese high schools and things like that. And the ma is really just like the that one character that's like evil, sort of magic, witchcraft, that sort of thing. Demon. It's a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of these like mystical kendo practitioners. So it's a really fun setting, and you have this detective Doro who comes from the underworld, and he interrupts them at their high school, and he's like, hey, like, look, this evil dude, Professor Mad, is gotten this after this ancient artifact that has powerful demons, and he's going to do bad things with it, and you have to help us. But it's a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of comedy to it. The characters are really cool, and the RPG gameplay, it's pretty linear, but you have a lot of I guess like special attacks that will do sort of status things, right? And let me go ahead and just bring up some notes that I have on it. But you can do things like healing, but you can do debuffs. You can do attack down, defense down, evade down. You can paralyze enemies. You can do sleep, things like that. And the enemies can do these things to you, right? So you have status effects of being poisoned or being paralyzed or whatnot. So it's really interesting. I feel like the gameplay in a lot of it is really based around managing different enemy types that will do like annoying things like that to you, and having to figure out when you maybe want to like boost your own attack in order to be able to do more than one hit point of damage to enemies, or raise your defense so you don't get completely destroyed.
I think one thing that's like really emphasizes this point, and I think what makes this game really interesting, is that like you do like level up, but if I recall correctly, like everything's kind of given to you on like a storyline basis, right? Like you don't get moves just from like, you know, going and grinding, if I'm correct, right? You just get them as the game deals out to you.
You absolutely can grind in the game. In fact, I found that I needed to, but that really just levels you up, and I think it raises like your base stats. But a lot of what you're going to be doing, like you don't get weapons and equipment and things like that from shops, for instance. So you're not going to be like getting gold so you can buy like better boots or something. All of those things are given to you, like upgrades to your special attacks are sort of given to you at certain points. But you can purchase items from item shops. And I think your max is like 9 items that you can hold. So you're going to be just stocking up sometimes on like just as many as you can of, you know, whatever the thing that gives you your magic points back, or that, you know, heals poison or something like that.
It's interesting you mentioned the rather linear nature of the game's, you know, progression, where levels and items and stuff are given to you progressing through story, because I was curious who developed the game, and I saw it was Phil Cafe, and I remembered, oh, they have quite a lot of roots in Japanese PC games. And one thing I've noticed with not all, but quite a few Japanese PC RPGs I've played, is that a lot of them really like to have that linear story-based character growth in them. Where, like, yeah, you gain levels, but it's basically just as the game progresses, you're gaining them, rather than having to actively seek them out and grind them. So if that's the case with how this game is, that's actually fascinating. That seems to be a rather common trope.
Yeah, and like I was saying, it's not necessarily that way with the levels, but it is that way with a lot of the other stuff. Like, I mean, at a certain point in the game, like, you literally just get like better special abilities across the board. You know, I mean, it's probably just a way of sort of gating your power progression, which, you know, is probably like handy from a game design perspective, depending on like how you're designing your game.
Yeah.
Yeah, the worlds themselves actually are more kind of, they are kind of segmented out. Like you do like go to, if I recall correctly, there's like a like evil version of like a baseball stadium and stuff. And I don't think you can like go back to that later, right? I think it is like you do the story thing here and then it's gone.
That's right. Yeah. The game is also broken up into chapters. Like they have these really fun sort of eye catches that come up at the end of a chapter. And it's like chapter 1 completed. So yeah, and you do a lot of sort of traveling back and forth between the girls' high school and the Netherworld, and yeah, there's a lot of kind of like parody elements to it too, and just comedy elements, like you were saying, like, you know, you go to like a sports center or something in the Netherworld, and it's just like the Netherworld's, you know, athletic field, and there's the Netherworld's hospital that you end up visiting, and things like that. You know, obviously hot springs in the Netherworld and stuff. It's weird too. I kind of forget actually how the NPCs respond to having like humans show up, you know, in their world. But, you know, like I said, the comedy is pretty good too. Like you visit the hospital and she, you know, you run into this like demon nurse, and she's like, well, you know, who needs to be healed? Is anybody sick? And everyone's like, no, I'm doing fine. Like, no, I'm pretty good and stuff. She's like, okay, well, let me hurt you a little bit. And then you get into a boss battle. But it's funny because after that, you actually get one of the best healing items in the game. Like, I think I actually still have it. I've been saving it, like, you know, for the end boss or something like that.
Yeah, that's something that I always do like really look for when, you know, as somebody who mainly just brute forces their way through these games. Any game that has like segmented levels and you can't like go back. Like any JRPG where you have a whole world available to you, that's a nightmare basically.
Yeah.
So when they break it up and say you're going to be here and this is what you're doing, then I think that's always like really important. I will say one challenge I did have with that game was, you know, there's kind of a couple aspects to this. So the humor seems more dialogue focused rather than like a visual aspect. There's definitely like visual components to the humor, but more frequently it seems like it's more dialogue focused. And if you're trying to play without knowing, you know, what's actually being said, or trying to use like a broken machine translation or something like that, you know, it's really challenging to get those little bits of you know, fun little bits of humor there and there, or here and there. So it's more about when you're looking at it, It's more about the visual aspect, the character design, and things like that, and kind of the voice acting when people have reactions to things. But it is, when you start relying on those things, it becomes a significant stretch to start like appreciating it without being able to read it, right? So
exactly, yeah. If your Japanese level is not there, you're definitely going to miss out on some of the stuff. Like one of my favorite interactions was like you end up running into this robot character, and they're like, "Who are you?" And so they're like, "Yeah, we're the Makendou sisters or whatever," and so then he's like, "Well, what are you made of?" And she's like, "Well, we're like fat and water," and he's like, "Fat and water? What kind of metals are those?" And it's just this ridiculous dialogue, right? But yeah, you have to be able to kind of like pick up on that, I think, to really appreciate that, because it's literally just an interaction. There's no visual element to that.
And machine translation, when using that, you are filling in a lot of the blanks, and so when you get that more abstract dialogue, it becomes almost impossible to follow at times.
But is that was your experience with the kind of the first portion of the game?
It was a challenge. I would not say it was like a complete like miss, but it was one of those things where like usually I can tell like when I'm using it like how something is written to some degree, because like to throw this completely out in a completely different direction, although I think the Angelique people may have worked on this game, Buddy Mission Bond on the Nintendo Switch.
They actually did.
Yeah,
that's a Ruby Party game as well.
Yeah. There's my connection with Angelique. There
you go.
Love Buddy Mission Bond. Oh, I love it. It's my favorite Switch game. And I have not finished it, but it's so good. Anyways, but like so much of the information in there is really in depth. They write it with a lot of language in there that explains things, and they repeat it. Is the thing. Now, is that good from like if it's translated to English and it's written that way? Whole other thing. But when you're machine translating it, it gives you so many opportunities to find where these pieces connect and things. Yeah. And you can fill in those gaps. You can see what the relationships are with these characters. And another thing with Buddy Mission Bond, very visual game. Like there's a lot going on there with like, it is like, two character portraits talking, but a lot of momentum. There's a lot of like animated cutscenes, or animated portraits kind of, coming in. Presentation's a huge part of that game. And so what you run into with like a game like Makeruna Makendou Z is you have this one hit joke that happens in this one scene or something like that, right? And like, because it's not like a ongoing long conversation, you just don't have a lot of resources to like fill in the gaps kind of thing. And that's something that I just kind of notice as you go through games and like who a game is targeted to. Because you'd be kind of surprised when you're using machine translation, like, oh, a game like made for kids. When I use this for like games for girls and stuff like that, it would be okay because the language is simple. But it actually makes it harder in a lot of ways because there's not a lot of details being given, or like the story is so simple. Like in the case of like a Happy Dance collection on the Wii, where you're just becoming an idol, there's not a lot of pieces to put together there, so it's more about just like the interactions happening per scene, so it's hard to make that overarching view of what's happening in some ways.
Been reading a lot more in Japanese recently, and I've been going through I went through the original Dokusei, which we might talk about later, and I also started reading Isaku, which is another work by the same author, Hiroto Masato. And I didn't think about this because I've exposed myself so much to the language, but there's a lot of little things, and there's a lot of little things in the language that, because I hadn't used Google Translate much and because I've kind of begun to understood them, thinking about it now, I'm like, yeah, it has to absolutely suck trying to machine translate any single game that uses really casual speech, because there's going to be so much that Google Translate is just going to be like, what the hell are you quoting?
And thankfully with like the kids games, most of the time it doesn't really matter. Yeah. But I'm also like a big believer, I know I'm just throwing games out here, I love Wii Ski on the Wii and the story it tells, even though when you think it wouldn't tell any story, it's like very cute and charming, and that would be completely missed probably if you're machine translating something like that.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. It's a huge downside to it, but it just depends on the game and how you're trying to use it and what you're trying to get from a game too. So,
well, perhaps Makeruna Makendou Z is a good candidate for a fan translation.
So actually, fan translations, filler.
Yes.
I gotta talk to you. So basically, all the time, there's something I get asked. How likely is X game going to get fan translated? Anytime I talk about something like that, and
yeah, I mean, if I would tell people that there's probably a next to 0% chance of that getting translated, right? Because it really just depends, Like even when I'm interested in projects, I kind of move from one to the other, and what I end up working on surprises me sometimes. I'm not, I'm not always just like picking, hey, this is a game that really deserves to be translated, I'm going to translate that. It's just randomly, I'm like, hey, I dumped a script for this thing, and then I started translating it, and I didn't stop until it was done.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Like, you have sent me multiple like fan translations for games that definitely don't have it. Like you give me the text, right? But I know you've sent me things like Ocho Sama Susomu, I think Team Innocent as well as one that you sent me scripts for, First Kiss Story. And so obviously on your side, that's not really the problem. So I assume it's more of the hacking component of getting that text in the game, making it run on a console and things like that, right?
Yeah. And not to, like place the blame or like point fingers or anything like that, because like I am the one holding up multiple projects right now as a translator, and that some of that isn't even related to translating, right? Like, Team Innocent like is pretty much in my lap. Like when people comment on my 10-year-old video on YouTube saying, "Hey, is this project ever going to happen?" I'm just like, probably, right? If I get around to it, and I don't mean to be nonchalant like that, but like it's just I translated the whole script, like Esper and I did a whole ton of work on like hacking it back in. I got a hold of other people to help out, right? But like what the work that's left on it is literally like syncing up lip flaps via control codes in the text to like the words that are in the script. And I started trying to do this, and it was driving me insane. And like I feel like someday I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make that happen. And I know, Noelle, I apologize, I believe you offered to help with that. Yeah. And I have been very tempted to just like kind of package that up and hand that off to you and be like, hey, if you want to try this and can do this work, like please do it. So again, like some of that is hold up on my end because I literally just have to sit down and like go through and make sure like I understand how all the tools work, and I can hand them to you and give you instructions in such a way that's like, here's what you would need to do this and to test it out. So yeah, I mean, it just depends. Like,
I will say this is not supposed to be guilt filler hour. And what more of what I want to just like, it's interesting to know what the holdups are on those kind of things, right? Because fan translations, it happens all the time, right? Like Moon, right? The PlayStation RPG. I think that fan translation was in works for many years, and then finally like an official translation just came out instead.
That's right.
So like, and they're always challenging projects and things like that, and having the right tools and resources for it. So
even in simpler cases, like there's a tool set out right now for the PC98, and it has kit for, I believe, most games that Elf made. There's a full translation using the TL wiki script of Yuna that exists, and it's a very good fan translation. Runs perfect on real hardware. You could probably translate all the Kyusei games with it. They're working on ADV98 support, so you could probably insert the PCFX Pia Carrot script into Pia Carrot PC98. But
you were mentioning that.
Yeah, but even in cases like that, there's still inevitably going to be hacking work that has to be done, and it doesn't matter if it's one tiny thing or one big thing. All it takes is one thing to hold a whole project up, and I think a lot of people don't understand how absolutely mind-numbingly tedious projects like that can get, and how frustrating even the smallest things can be to work around, and how they can hold up a whole project.
Yeah, and it's not to kind of belabor this, but it's really just if anyone's ever worked on a project, right, it's so easy for it to get derailed, right? Like some of it is really just it's like, do you have the will to see this through? And because these projects take the skills of multiple people need to have the will to see it through. And you can start something with all of the best intentions, right? But like getting through that, that last mile, like, it happens, or it doesn't, sometimes. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned earlier, I think you've done a handful of these. I know more recently, I think you did Oh My Goddess, right?
So that's the other thing this year, that I've actually been working on and I'm somewhat proud of is, speaking of something taking a long time too. Esper Knight dumped the script for Oh My Goddess, on the PCFX back a long time ago.
Is it Oh My Goddess or Oh My Goddess? I always forget.
In Japanese, it's Oh My Goddess.
Okay.
It was localized as Oh My Goddess. I use them interchangeably, but I just figure, like, for the sake of our audience, they might be more familiar with Oh My Goddess,
Gotcha.
like kind of the manga and the anime and stuff. It's all localized that way. So, but yeah, I got the urge this past year. It was probably like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months ago or something, to just open that up again and start picking away at it. And it's so different from the translation work that I've been doing recently that I've actually been really enjoying it. And I also like the idea of, maybe I feel like it's one of those PCFX games that's the closest to being done and would probably be easy to play test in comparison to really anything else that's an option for me right now. And like, the translation work is going well on that. It's a huge script. It's like the size of the Welcome to Pia Carrot script.
Oh, wow.
Maybe not that big. It's a little smaller. But it's a big script. It was a PC 98 game, so it's a PC 98 port. The graphics aren't great. They retain kind of a limited color palette, I think, from the PC 98 release, but it includes full voice acting. So it's all the voice actors and actresses from, sort of the OVA and TV series, and I don't know if they did drama CDs or whatever for Oh My Goddess.
They probably did.
Yeah, so that's really cool, and it's fun. Like, it's an Oh My Goddess story, right? It's really just like if there was an OVA or a movie or, some sort of a short story arc in the manga. That's basically what it is. And there's some mini games too. But it's been really enjoyable. That's a project that's going quite well.
We talked a little bit earlier about, like, kind of the linearity of Yuna FX, versus, probably something like Pia Carrot, probably. Like, where does this game fit in that regard? Is it something that's pretty straightforward? You're going to get a story start to finish, or are there a bunch of branching paths, or?
That's a great question. I believe it's going to be more linear, but that said, that I actually get sort of into like a slog in portions of the script because there is dialogue and even scenes and things like that happen, obviously based on choice segments, right? So there are definitely choice segments in the game. They definitely influence like things that happen and who you talk to and what you see. But by and large, the story is linear. And I forget who the YouTuber is. Maybe we can include a link to the video in the description or something. But I believe I sent you a link to a video that was made recently. Somebody who's a big Oh My Goddess fan actually played through this game, and they posted some footage to YouTube with a little video about it. I think they have the ending and everything in it.
I think it's Yaskudu, right?
That could
or
be.
Yiskudu?
Yeah.
Is that what that's supposed to be? Yiskudu
I don't
Japan
know.
Gaming?
Yeah. And yeah, it was really great to see. There's actually almost like these combat segments in the game. So as part of do you want me to kind of talk about the plot in just a general sense?
Yeah, I have nothing to say about this,
I'm
so
good with that.
Go ahead with what you got.
Yeah, so it's very typical. Like Keiichi ended up like he called a wrong number and he contacted God, and basically he was granted a wish, which he wished, like, basically the goddess that was talking to him, he wished that like she would come live with him, right? And so that's the basis of this story. But there's always this like sort of like tension between them where they're like their relationship is kind of it's set because of this wish, but like they also kind of have like they haven't necessarily done all of the work to like on their relationships. So it's just funny, like her sister, like this other goddess, is encouraging you two to go on a date. And so you guys go on this date, and it's really awkward and heartwarming. And there's a whole lot of stuff that can happen with that. Like, you know, there's choice segments and things like that. But the stakes ramp up, right? So one of the villain, you know, antagonist characters in the series ends up uncovering this really powerful relic. And she uses it to basically like, I don't know if that... I don't want to spoil things, but she uses it to fight against you guys, and things end up getting kind of out of her control, right? So it's always interesting. You always have these really sort of like small scale, like interpersonal issues that the characters are dealing with, and then you know, things ramp up, and like all of a sudden, like the fate of not just the world, but maybe the universe is at stake. Right? So this is you know, another one of those kind of oh my goddess stories, and you know, it's great. The characters are fun. You sort of have the three Norse goddess sisters and stuff like that. It's a cute game. It's the kind of thing that a oh my goddess fan would appreciate.
I read I think the first couple volumes of the manga. I must have been like 16 when I read them, but I really, really enjoyed them, and I knew about the game for a while, so I'm curious to see this come to fruition, because I'd like to see more of Belle Dandy and Co.
That's great to hear, because, you know, my goal, I feel like recently, has been like, hey, what can I translate for the PCFX that is going to like help paint it in a better light, or bring people in who are just general game fans to really see that, hey, there are some like just games on the system that just your average gamer would enjoy. This is not the game to do that. So I appreciate hearing that it has, you know, an audience. It's an audience of one at least.
I am looking at this. This does remind me quite a bit of like what Yuna FX looks like in terms of like maybe the mechanics of it to some degree. That's what it reminds me a bit of. So I'm definitely curious to check it out. I guarantee this will be the only oh my goddess thing I ever look at in my lifetime. But
conversely, it might get me back into oh my goddess, because if you've seen my videos, you know I have this really bad habit of, oh, I'm going to talk about this thing. Now let me watch everything adjacent to it. So when I did my Dokisei video, I snuck in that 10-minute segment about the OVA. So I think what's going to happen is I'm going to play the oh my goddess PCFX game, or I'm not going to play it. I'm going to look at it and be like, I need to watch the anime and see the manga first, and I'm going to spend like just binge it and then play the game.
Well, that's one of the things I really appreciated. I thought that was really genius about that piece, that Pia Carrot video that you did, was you did watch the OVA, which is not very good. But you used footage from that to kind of fill in, you know, portions of the video, and I feel like it really did add a lot of context to it.
Yeah, I mentioned it, I think it was before we started doing the podcast. I'm not like a huge anime fan, so whenever I come into these things, it's usually just like I'm looking at this specific thing, and that is it. So, but I think there's value in that for sure. Yeah. It does make it a little weird, and I'm sure like oh my goddess fans won't really appreciate my perspective that much. Although I did find that like Shaman King Master Spirits on the Game Boy Advance, I did have people tell me later that like it's nice seeing that you enjoy this game, even though I'm a Shaman King fan, because it like, kind of solidifies that this is just a good video game in some ways, versus just like being a good game for the fans kind of thing to some degree. But it does make it a little harder to appreciate to some degree with some of those things. Like I played the Little Witch Academia game on I think PS4. Not a huge fan of that one, but there are cool ideas there. But I think I would have appreciated that more if I was an anime fan for that. So that's interesting to hear, though, that is like coming along, though, because that sounds like that is actually progressing. Are there any other translations that you've working on that have any real progression to them, or you think that's kind of the main one at this point?
Like related to the PCFX, or just in
PCFX
general?
Specifically. Sorry.
No, I have not. I mean, and partially too, like I have this real sort of inertia and momentum. You know, that That's the word that I'm looking for. Affect me. So like if I get started on a project, if I'm going on it, like I'll tend to just keep going.
Yeah.
But if anything derails me, it's sometimes it's extremely hard for me to get back onto that train. So, with Oh My Goddess, like now that I've sort of built up a rhythm with that and a bit of a routine, I'm trying to stick with it so that I don't get too distracted by anything else. I do have other scripts, kind of like you were saying, one or two are translated, some of them are not, for the PCFX that I actually would like to translate, but I'd like to focus on Oh My Goddess and see if I can finish that up, because the end is it's in sight within a reasonable amount of time. Like during this year, I could easily finish that.
Well, I will speak for everyone and say that even if it doesn't get finished, I think everyone appreciates the work that fan translators put in, for sure.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So it's
on behalf of everyone.
So I really appreciate it on my side as well. I don't play nearly as many fan translations as I should, though. But if it's there, I will use it if I want to play a game for sure. So. You did it. You made it to the end of part 1. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey as we talked about a variety of PCFX titles, Noelle's history of the console, as well as giving some updates to Filler and what he's been working on in relation to the PCFX. Next time we'll be talking about 2 particular topics. One is what type of anime talent was involved with the PCFX, kind of better understanding, the types of people working on this console, as well as a general conversation talking about whether or not the PCFX could ever really catch on in the modern retro game space, and then also discussing, what needs to happen for the PCFX to be able to be successful there. I'm thinking I'm going to plan to put it out in about a week or so. But I will post in a variety of channels my updates there on when that will come out if it changes for any reason. In the meantime, though, make sure you go check out Noelle's YouTube channel, Amelie Doree, where she talks a lot about a variety of PC98 and PCFX topics, a lot of which we touched on today. Then you also have Filler's channel called Playongo, where he does a lot of game pickups and things like that, and has a variety of other videos, including a pretty deep history of PCFX videos, if you want to check those out. He also has a website called Matt's Messy Room, where you can get some updates about his fan translation projects. I have more extensive links for both of them in the description, as well as any other links that we mentioned here today in the podcast, and then at the end of the next part, they'll give their full plugs in their own voice when that time comes. Otherwise, if for some reason you don't know who I am, One Controller Port has a focus on obscure and underappreciated games, often resulting in us covering a lot of imports specifically. I do videos, podcasts, and streams, and I'm working on getting some PCFX stuff out, but the timeline on that's kind of still up in the air at the moment, but I would say probably not until after part 2 of this podcast comes up. I really appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you come back for part 2.